Please rise for the jury.
Please be seated, everyone. The record will show that parties have all returned to the courtroom. Our jury has rejoined us, and we are ready to resume direct examination of Mr. Schmidt.
Your Honor, we I think we moved to admit 11A1. Now we request to publish it.
You may.
Mr. Schmidt, then, we were talking about 11A1 here before the break. It's now on the TV behind you there, and I think I left a copy of it in front of you as well. But was 11A1 then a copy of the profile developed from F5 by Linda Sauer that you used then to compare to the findings that you made on the straw?
Yes.
Okay. And you gave us a description, but now that we're looking at it, can you tell us then what the check marks represent?
The check marks are check marks that I made, and that check mark indicates that the profile from the straw matched the crime scene profile at each of those locations. On the left, it lists the DNA locus or location where we have DNA results. And then the numbers next to that are the alleles or DNA factors present for that locus. And the check mark by those two factors indicate that it matches.
There's a couple indications here on Penta E and Penta D where there appears to be no results. Is that right?
That's right. Linda Sauer did not develop results at those loci. And also FGA was a third locus where she didn't have results from the crime scene sample.
So then at 3 loci, then did that make it, well, impossible for you to prove, to compare because she had not developed a result to what you developed from the straw?
I could not compare the results at FGA because she didn't have any results from the crime scene sample for that locus. The Penta D and Penta E loci were loci that we were using in the kit at the time when the crime scene sample was analyzed in 2005. Those two loci are not in the kit that we are using nowadays, the Global Filer kit. So I couldn't make comparisons at those loci. Anyway, she didn't get results at those loci, but the kit we're using now doesn't have those loci in them.
At every available loci where there were results from F5, were you able to compare results that you were able to get from the straw to F5?
Yes.
And at every location you were able to make a comparison, did you find there to be a match?
Yes, there was one locus where I had partial results from the straw, and that's the TPOX locus.
Yeah.
It's at the very bottom. It has the circle around that 9. Now, the crime scene sample has the 9 factor in that profile. The straw, I do not have that 9 factor. It's possible that it could be there, but it's dropping out. It's one of those weak samples. I left the possibility for the 9 to be there or some other allele. The 8 is definitely there in the profile I have from the straw, but the 9 is dropping out. It's not present in the profile from the straw.
And again, does that mean that the 9's not there or just not detectable from what you were able to develop from the straw?
Our instrument didn't detect it.
May I approach a witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Handing the witness what's marked as State's Exhibit 11A2 for identification purposes first. Mike, can you tell us what that is?
This is a statistic worksheet I made if we were ever to get a known sample to be compared to that straw in the crime lab. These were basically my allele calls that I developed in the DNA profile of the straw.
And how was this used in reaching the findings you compiled in your report?
I didn't use this statistic sheet until later on, until we received an actual known sample from Jerry Burns. And in that DNA report, I made the match of Jerry Burns to the straw.
Okay.
And I used this number from this sheet to report that.
Okay, all right. So when you developed a known sample, then you further used the documentation that's in 11A2?
Yes.
Okay. May I approach the witness again, Your Honor?
You may.
Handing the witness what's been marked as State's Exhibit 11C. I ask if you recognize this exhibit, Mike.
Yes.
Okay, what is this?
This is a copy of a DNA report that I issued January 9th of 2019.
And was this report then compiled and issued at the request of the Cedar Rapids Police Department to examine an item containing a known buccal swab of the defendant Jerry Burns in order to develop a profile for comparison to the profile developed from the crime scene F5?
Yes.
Was this report made at or near the time you analyzed this known buccal swab from Jerry Burns, or what was described as such, in order to develop a profile for comparison?
Yes.
And was it completed on January 9th of 2019?
Yes.
And obviously, you being the author of that, did you have knowledge of the matters contained therein?
Yes.
And is this a record kept in the regular course of business activity at the DCI Criminalistics Laboratory?
Yes, it is.
Is it still practice to maintain and keep these records?
Yes. For homicide cases, we keep them at least 80 years.
Okay. This case isn't that old. But.
Right.
Does this appear to be a fair and accurate copy of the report?
Yes.
Okay. And do you believe this report would be helpful in explaining your testimony regarding your findings therein?
Yes.
And first I want to ask you to again explain, just for now, explain the process you used to complete the examination of item lab number 54, agency number J, B as in boy 2, item containing known buccal swabs from Jerry Lynn Burns.
DCI item 54 was a known buccal sample from Jerry Burns. It's basically Q-tips that they swabbed the inner surface of Jerry Burns' mouth with. I took a cutting from one of those and developed a DNA profile from that cutting. I compared that DNA profile to the results that Linda Sauer had from the dress from 2005.
And was that process you used, again, the method of analysis, the PCR-STR method that you described that you used for analysis of the items contained in State's Exhibit 11A or the previous report 39?
Yes.
So the same process used as you did on an examination of all these items?
Yes.
Right? Okay. Move to enter States 11C, Your Honor.
Any objection to 11C?
No objection.
11C will be received and made part of the record.
And if we could publish that too, Your Honor?
You may.
So on this document, 11C, we see, again, the description of the item containing the known buccal swabs from Jerry Lynn Burns. In the explanation section, is that just meant to explain the testing that you did, that you explained for us in court?
Yes, our DNA reports are required to report basically which loci we were using for our DNA profiles. It's one of the requirements of the FBI DNA standards.
Underneath the results of examination, first, you noted a result of examination that you did on the buccal sample of Jerry Burns. Explain to us, if you would, that result.
I had a known buccal sample of Jerry Burns, and I developed a DNA profile from that sample. I compared that to the weak DNA profile previously developed from the straw, which was DCI item 49. And the profile from the straw was consistent with the known DNA profile of Jerry Burns. The probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 38 quintillion. I also compared the known DNA profile from the buccal sample of Jerry Burns to the crime scene profile, which was stained F5. The partial DNA profile results at 12 out of the 13 corresponding common STR loci between the two kits, the Global Filer kit and the PowerPlex 16 kit. Of the major contributor previously developed from stain F5 from DNA report dated December 5th of 2005, from the black dress, described as item F1 on DNA report dated September 8th, 2003, was consistent with the known DNA profile of Jerry Burns. The probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 100 billion.
Okay. Thank you. I want to ask you just to back up a second here in regards to item number 49. Essentially, are you reporting here that the profile from the straw was consistent with the buccal swab?
Yes.
And so, if you could explain, because it's not a number we deal with very often, the number 1 out of 38 quintillion?
It's basically a 3 with a lot of zeros behind it. The national debt is in the trillions of dollars. This is a number that's far beyond that. So the number quintillion, there would be a 3, and then it would have 19 zeros behind it. A million has 6 zeros, and a billion has 9 zeros, and this number quintillion has 19 zeros.
How's a number like that reached in terms of random probability analysis?
We used to cut off numbers at the 100 billions, when we made a DNA match. At the time, Linda Sauer would have been working on this case. We used the 100 billion cutoff. The numbers could be as high as trillion or quadrillion, but they didn't get too much higher than that. That was when we were using 13 to 15 loci. Now we're using even more loci. We're using 21 STR loci, so those numbers are just going to get bigger. It's possible in the future they may add an additional 20 loci to profiles. I don't know what's going to happen, but those numbers could just keep getting higher and higher.
Can I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
You hand the witness what's been marked as State Exhibit 11C1. First for identification. Mike, can you tell us what that document is?
This is a copy of Linda Sauer's original statistic sheet, the allele calls that she made on the crime scene sample for the F5 dress stain. It also has my writing on it. I've noted where the loci match between the crime scene profile and the known DNA profile of Jerry Burns.
So how did you use this then in reaching the findings that you compiled in your report?
I used Linda Sauer's interpretation of the crime scene profile, which is this statistics worksheet, and I compared the data on this sheet to the known DNA profile I developed from the known buccal sample of Jerry Burns. And I went down locus by locus to see if there was a match or an elimination. And there was a match at all of the loci that Linda Sauer had results for.
Are the markings that are contained on this exhibit then ones that that you made on it while performing this comparison process?
Yes.
And I think that, as with the previous similar exhibit, there may be some notations involving some other individuals at the laboratory that they put on it pursuant to their duties and involvement?
Yes.
Okay. What's contained on there from other individuals?
Again, you have Erica Ng's initials. She was the original tech reviewer of Linda Sauer's report. Scott Stockslager's initials from November, and then again from December. He was the technical reviewer of the work that I did in this case.
Does this document actually show you confirming that the profile developed from Jerry Burns' known buccal swab was found to be consistent with F5 and to match at every available loci and alleles for comparison?
Yes.
So this actually demonstrates the process of you making the confirmation that where you could compare it, Jerry Burns' known DNA matched F5.
That's correct.
Is this helpful in demonstrating the process that you conducted to make this comparison and explain your testimony to the jury?
Yes.
Okay, move to admit states 11C1, Your Honor.
11C2 or 11C1?
I think it's 11C1. Does that say 11C1, Mike?
The sticker says 11C1.
Okay. Mr. Spies, have you had an opportunity to review 11C1?
I have, and I do have a question for the witness, if I may.
Go ahead.
Mr. Peterson, once again, there are notations on 11C1, and the notations look like they were superimposed upon a previous iteration of this same page. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
So the last time we looked at this, there was the notation FBI database do not use. You explained that to us. Now there's another notation below that that says, in a circle, report equal consistent, and then parentheses, no FGA, et cetera, and initials beneath that. Do you know who made that notation?
Those were my notations.
Okay. And so when you wrote on this version of the document, report equal consistent, no FGA, what were you trying to tell yourself?
That was just a reminder to me in the report. I couldn't say it was a match I had to say it was consistent. At the DCI lab, if we're missing results at one of the core loci, and the FGA was one of those core loci that the FBI require, then we can say the report is consistent, or we can say it's a partial match. And so in my report, I just needed to remember to say it was consistent with the known DNA profile of Jerry Burns.
And that was based on the fact that you didn't have a complete profile from the crime scene?
That's right. Linda Sauer was missing results at the FGA locus from the crime scene.
And there were a couple of other stray alleles in Linda Sauer's profile, right?
There was one locus, the CSF 1PO locus. Linda knew that the 11 allele needed to be present in the crime scene profile, and so whoever would match the crime scene profile would definitely have the 11 allele. She left open the possibility that in addition to the 11 allele, there could have been another allele that was undetected or too weak to be detected by our instrument at the time.
Is that the complete explanation for what you noted there in your circle?
I did write match because it is still a match. The known DNA profile only has the 11 allele at the CSF locus, so it is still a match.
And in fact, your bosses at the DCI said it would not be reported as a match.
Our standard operating procedure states that it won't be reported as a match. We can use the word consistent, but not match.
And you had been so directed by Paul Bush, right?
Michael Howerson probably wrote our interpretation standard operating procedure, but that language has been in our procedures for a long time, so probably originally Mike Peterson wrote that or had that policy of saying consistent when we don't have results at all of the loci.
Not a match, consistent.
Consistent, partial match.
No objection, Your Honor.
The court will receive and make part of the record States Exhibit 11C1.
May we publish, Your Honor?
You may.
Mike, if you could, then, with regards to 11C1, could you take us through the what we're seeing there as far as the markings that you added to this document when performing the comparison between Jerry Burns' known buckle and crime scene F5?
Okay, on the left side of the page, that's my writing. At the top, it says versus item 54 known, and DCI item 54 is the known DNA profile from Jerry Burns. And underneath that, I have the words match, match, match written multiple times. I'm basically going down through each locus, comparing the crime scene profile results to the results I obtained from the known DNA profile of Jerry Burns, and noting whether they matched.
And at every possible loci that you could compare and make a comparison, did you find the known buccal swab of Jerry Burns to be a match to F5?
Yes.
Only but for the absence of the FGA, which Linda was not able to develop from the crime scene profile, then that's the only thing that prevents you from being able to use the terminology of an exact match.
At the FGA locus, and also she left open the possibility of an additional allele at the CSF locus that was too weak to be detected back then.
Do those disclaimers at all undercut the confidence in your where you were able to make a match in the sample between the profile?
No. If you go further down on the worksheet, the calculations are there, at least for the Caucasian and African American populations. The Caucasian, it's a 5 with 12 zeros, so that is, greater than 1 out of 100 billion. Fewer than 1 out of 100 billion unrelated individuals would be expected to have this same DNA profile.
It's that probability, random match probability that gives you great confidence in the findings.
Yes.
Can I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
The annual witness has been marked as State's Exhibit 11C2. And this has a couple of pages to it. I believe. Ask you, Mike, have you seen that before?
Yes.
What is that?
This is the known DNA profile that I developed from the buccal sample from Jerry Burns. And this is what I used. I took these two sheets and compared them to a copy of the worksheet that Linda Sauer prepared in 2005. And that's how I was able to match each locus, where there are corresponding loci between the two kits that we used, the one kit we were using in 2005 and the kit that we're using today.
Okay. And it's your testimony that you used this particular worksheet then in reaching the findings that you compiled in your report, previously introduced and accepted into evidence as 11C?
Yes.
Okay. And are the markings you made ones that were made during this comparison process?
Yes.
Is this a fair and accurate copy of that document?
Yes, it is.
Is this one that's kept in the regular course of business at the DCI lab?
Yes.
Does this actually show you, again, in connection with 11C1, previous document we discussed, going about making the comparison between the profile developed from Jerry Burns' known buccal swab and the crime scene profile F5?
Yes.
And would this also be helpful in demonstrating that process to the jury?
Yes, it would.
Move to admit states 11C2, Your Honor.
Mr. Spies, have you had an opportunity to review that document?
Yes, I have, Your Honor. We have no objection.
The court will receive and make part of today's record states 11C2.
Permission to publish, Your Honor?
You may.
This is 11C1 I'm handing back to you. You have 11C2 in front of you. We have 11C2 up here. If you could, as you would in science class, explain to us kind of how you are making these comparisons using these two documents and how you're able to make a finding.
Okay, so I took Linda Sauer's worksheet from 2005, or a copy of the worksheet, and I looked at each of the locations that we're testing for, and I compared the results at those locations to the DNA profile that I just developed in 2018 from the known sample of Jerry Burns. For example, the first locus, D3, the crime scene profile had a 1516. Jerry Burns' known DNA profile also has the 1516. The next locus for the known profile, there's a 17 at VWA. In the crime scene profile, there's also the 17 at VWA. And I would just go through each locus and until I've looked at all the loci that we had results for to see that everything matches. On this one, the CSF locus, there's an 11 allele. This is the locus that Linda Sauer said the 11 allele was definitely there, but she left open the possibility of there being another weaker undetected allele. In the known DNA sample, there is no other allele. There's just the 11 allele. So it's still a match to the crime scene profile.
Do those findings then continue as you find the the loci on 11C1, or Linda's profile, and then compare that to what you were able to develop on the known in the areas where you showed us on 11C2?
Yes.
And are there any, based upon your review of this documentation and your testing this case, are there any inconsistencies between those two documents?
No.
Okay. Go ahead and take that down, and I'll take those two exhibits back from you. We've talked a little bit about random match probability, the numbers that were used in this case, 1 out of 38 quintillion for the comparison between the straw in Mr. Burns' known DNA profile from the buccal swab, and also the 1 out of 100 billion statistic. Using it as an example, how do you explain the statistics in terms of, let's say, if you had a pile of about 100 billion lottery tickets in front of you?
Well, in lottery or Powerball, you have, 6 or 7 numbers, and you have to match all 6 or 7 of those numbers in order to win the jackpot. That's kind of like what we're doing with the DNA testing. We're looking at a number of different locations, except it's more than just 6 or 7. It's 13 in the past. In this particular sample, we had results at 12 of those 13 locations. So that's about twice as many numbers as you have in Powerball that would need to match. And for all 12, for you to correctly guess all 6 Powerball numbers plus an additional 6, the chances of that happening are going to be very small. So for this case, the probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 100 billion. It's kind of like what would be your chances if you were playing a lottery where you had to correctly guess 12 numbers at random.
Based upon your knowledge as a criminalist, as a scientist with your training experience, in reference to learned treatises on the subject, what is the approximate population of humans on Earth?
It's approximately 7 billion people.
And using basic mathematics, how many Earth populations are included in the number 100 billion?
It would be at least 12 or 13 planets full of people.
In your professional opinion, based upon your knowledge, education, training, and expertise, would you expect to find anyone else, including any other relatives, that have the same profile as Jerry Burns to the extent to which his profile matches F5?
I'll object to that. It's not the proper subject of opinion testimony, Your Honor. I think it's a mischaracterization of the import of the statistic about which the witness has testified and as Ms. Sauer testified. So I'd say it's not the proper subject as framed for opinion testimony.
Response to the objection, Mr. Maybanks.
I believe that Mr. Schmidt has laid foundation for his extensive knowledge and expertise, not only in the area of DNA profiling, but by the use of the statistics to make these type of findings, and that this would be certainly within his realm of expertise. Any objection would go to the weight, not the admissibility.
Anything further on the objection, Mr. Spees?
Again, Your Honor, based on Ms. Sauer's testimony, I think that this is put in a framework that's not the appropriate subject for opinion testimony.
Given the information that the court has received and that the jury has received regarding Mr. Schmidt's education, background, and experience, I will allow him to answer the question. The objection will be overruled.
A match at 12 loci, I would only expect to come from an identical twin of Jerry Burns. In my 22 years of working forensic DNA cases, I've seen matches between family members at 7 or 8 loci, but I have yet to see one, 12, 13 loci.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Be handing the witness what's been previously marked as Stakes Exhibit 11D. First question, Mike, you recognize that exhibit?
Yes.
What is that?
This is a DNA report I issued in March 27th, 2019. These were known buccal swabs from Donald Burns and Kenneth Burns.
And was this made at or near the time that you examined known buccal swabs from Kenneth and Don Burns?
Yes.
Are you the author of this report?
Yes.
Is this a report that's also kept in the regular course of business activity with the DCI Crime Lab?
Yes.
And does this appear to be a fair and accurate copy of that report?
Yes.
Do you believe this report would be helpful to be able to explain your testimony regarding your findings in the report?
Yes, I do.
If you would, does the report indicate that the same PCR, shorthand and repeat testing was done on the items containing the known buccal swabs of Donald and Kenneth Burns as was done with all the other items of evidence in this case?
Yes.
And does this report contain the results of your examination of those items?
Yes, it does.
Move to enter states 11D, Your Honor.
Mr. Spies, have you had an opportunity to review that exhibit?
I have, Your Honor, yes, and we have no objection.
The court will receive and make part of today's record States Exhibit 11D as in dog.
If we could publish that, Your Honor.
You may.
Going down to the results section of this report, first under number 55, can you tell us what your results were, the examination of the known buccal swab of Donald Burns?
I developed a DNA profile from the known buccal sample of Donald Burns, and Donald Burns was eliminated as the major contributor to the DNA profile previously developed from stain F5 on the dress. The DNA profile developed from the toothbrush bristles, DCI item 53, matched the known DNA profile of Donald Burns. Probability of finding this profile in a population of unrelated individuals chosen at random would be less than 1 out of 8.4 nonillion.
And can you tell us the results of your examination of item 56, the known buccal swab of Kenneth Burns?
I developed a DNA profile from DCI item 56. That was a known buccal sample of Kenneth Burns. And Kenneth Burns was eliminated as the major contributor to the DNA profile previously developed from stain number F5 on the dress.
Does this report then summarize the findings of your analysis on the known buccal swabs of Kenneth and Donald Burns and your conclusions that you eliminated them as major contributors to the DNA profile developed from F5?
Yes, they were both eliminated.
Approach the witness, Your Honor.
You may.
The witness would have marked as States Exhibits 11D1 and 11D4. Ask you if you recognize 11D1 and 11D4.
These are copies of Linda Sauer's results from 2005 from the profile developed from the dress, stain F5. And they also have my markings on them when I made the comparison from the known samples from Ken Burns and Donald Burns against the dress stain profile.
And are the markings contained on 11D1 and 11D4 markings that you made as a result of your first analysis, developing a profile from the known buccal swabs of Ken and Don Burns, and then your comparison to F5?
Yes.
Does this actually show you then going through the process of eliminating both Ken and Don Burns as contributors to the DNA profile from F5?
Yes, it does. It shows the same process that I used when I had Jerry Burns' known DNA profile. I would take the known profiles and go down locus by locus and see whether the individual was either included or eliminated at each of those loci. And I was able to eliminate both Donald and Ken at a number of loci.
Is this also a record kept in the regular course of business activity at the DCI Crime Lab?
Yes.
And is this something retained then for potentially for future use and viewing at the lab?
Yes.
Is this document helpful to explain to the jury your process of comparing the DNA profiles developed from the known buccal swabs of Don and Ken Burns to crime scene profile F5?
Yes.
Move to admit States 11D1 and 11D4, Your Honor.
Mr. Spies, have you had an opportunity to review what's been proposed as 11D1 and 11D4?
Yes, I have, Your Honor, and we have no objection to either.
The court will receive and make part of the record States Exhibits 11D1 and 11D4.
And can we publish, Your Honor?
You may.
First, I believe we have up 11D1 here, and you still have that in front of you, Mike?
Yes.
Okay. And could you just kind of explain to us the markings that you made on 11D1?
Okay, on the left of the page, I'm comparing it against item 55. Now, this is the dress stain being compared against item 55, which was the known DNA profile of Donald Burns. And as I'm going down the loci, I'm able to eliminate Donald Burns as being a donor to the dress profile based on certain alleles that Donald Burns has that aren't showing up in the dress profile.
Okay. And so does this then describe, or at least contain markings and notations that allowed you to confidently eliminate Don Burns' profile as a contributor to F5?
Yes.
And now if we could show 11D4. And if you could take us through the markings that you made in on 11D4.
Okay, so the markings on the left, those are areas where I was able to eliminate Kenneth Burns as being a DNA donor to the F5 dress stain as well. I have arrows pointing to the various alleles that are present in the crime scene profile, but are not present in the known DNA profile of Kenneth Burns.
And does this then show the process that you engaged in to confidently eliminate Kenneth Burns as the contributor to the F5 crime scene profile?
Yes.
So now that, and you can go ahead and take that down now. I'll take those exhibits back too. Now that we've gone through the process of how you eliminated the brothers of Jerry Burns as contributors to the profile, and also considering your previous explanation of how you haven't seen more than, I think you said, 7 or 8 loci similar and related individuals.
Yes.
I just want you to explain then, in the statistic it says, it refers to the term 100 billion unrelated individuals. Can you tell us why that's used and what difference that might make, if any, in that compiling that statistic?
In 2005, we just stopped counting after 100 billion. If we had a match and the statistic was fewer than 1 out of 100 billion, then we just stopped counting. Sometimes the numbers would be in the trillions or quadrillions, but the supervisor at the time, Mike Peterson, determined that we don't really need to stop counting after 100 billion. It's hard for people to understand numbers that big. The debt's trillions of dollars, so we could have gone with trillion, but 100 billion was big enough for Mike Peterson, who was the DNA supervisor at the time.
And when you use that random probability statistic, as I was saying about how we've eliminated both of Mr. Burns' brothers as contributors to the DNA profile, and you said you hadn't seen more than 7 or 8 similar profiles at 7 or 8 similar alleles and related individuals, why does that include the term unrelated in the statistic? Do you understand my question? Like, what does that mean?
Okay, the FBI requires us to report a statistic based on unrelated individuals, or a database of unrelated individuals. If you have relatives in the database, then those numbers will change from what they are now. So basically, the FBI requirement is we report on unrelated individuals.
Based upon your training, experience, and education with these numbers, if it was based upon related individuals, would the number be changed in any significant way?
Numbers would be changed. Some cases they'd probably be made smaller, in other cases probably bigger. But right now we're required to report a match based on unrelated individuals.
And the reason that terminology is used is because it's required by the FBI to maintain your accreditation and so on and so forth?
Yes.
A couple more things for you, Mike, here before I turn you over to Mr. Spies. You recall on or about March 19th of 2019 being requested by Investigator Denlinger of the Cedar Rapids Police Department to access another piece of evidence being stored at the DCI lab in this case and send it to an outside laboratory.
Yes.
May I approach witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Behind the witness, what's been marked as State's Exhibit 17N1. It's a couple of documents here, but I'll ask you first on that page with the marking on it. Do you recognize this photocopy here?
Yes, State's Exhibit 17N1 is a FedEx receipt that I filled out when I mailed the DCI Item I, the extracts from DCI Item I, out to Bodie Technology, which is a private forensic DNA lab in Virginia.
And Exhibit I has been described previously in this case as scrapings from the gear shift selector. Was that your understanding as to what you were packaging and sending off to the Bodie labs?
Yes. These were the extracts that Linda Sauer and Mike Peterson looked at in previous DNA reports. Mike Peterson issued a DNA report in 1997 regarding this item, and then Linda Sauer issued a DNA report in approximately 2002 from this item. And those extracts were saved all the way back from 1997 to 2002, and they were kept in our freezer until I mailed them out to Bodie Technology.
When you accessed, well, actually, I'll go to page 2. Is this show a receipt of that delivery, then showing that indeed was made?
Yes.
When you accessed Exhibit I from the freezer at your facility, can you just kind of tell us about that process and how you do it to make sure that the integrity of the items are preserved, both in packaging or preparing it for mailing and sending it off?
When the DCI lab was first doing DNA testing, we saved the DNA extracts from all the samples that we ran, basically in a freezer. We stopped doing that in about 2002 because we were running out of space and it was expensive to do that. And the FBI requirement was that we retain or return anything that we test. And so there would always be stain remaining on whatever sample we were sending back to the police or sheriffs after we were done with it. So it just made sense to not keep saving all these samples when there's still sample to go that can always be gone back to if the sheriffs or police hold on to the evidence. Yeah, we stopped doing that in 2002, but this case was originally looked at for DNA in 1997, so at that time we were saving extracts, and we saved those in boxes that are in our deep freezer.
And the 17N1 contained a fair and accurate copy of the FedEx receipt with your handwriting on it indicating you made this delivery.
Yes.
Move to admit 17N1.
Any objection to 17N1?
No objection, Your Honor. Thank you.
17N, as in Nancy, 1 will be received and made part of the record.
Nothing further this time.
Cross-examination, Mr. Spees.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Schmidt, in your career with criminal investigation as early as 1999, you were receiving training on crime scene examination and preservation of crime scene evidence, weren't you?
That's right.
And to be clear, and I think it's obvious from your testimony this afternoon, you had no role in the examination of the crime scene in this homicide, did you?
I was 4 years old when this homicide occurred.
I was going to ask.
I was not at the crime scene.
Okay. Importantly, though, as other witnesses have testified, the work that you do at the Criminalistics Laboratory is, in many respects, only as good as the evidence, the integrity of the evidence, and the thoroughness of the investigation leading up to the material coming to you.
Yes.
So, pointedly, throughout your testimony this afternoon, in referring to Exhibit F5, this stain, you never used the word suspect. You only referred to that as a stain. Is that accurate?
Yes.
So, You don't know if this came from a suspect, it was just represented as a stain from the crime scene to which you were asked to make comparisons.
Yes.
It's a male profile, or it contains a male profile,
Yes,
and Linda Sauer testified that it was a mixture,
that's correct.
and you would agree with that.
Yes.
And going forward to the statistics about which you testified, whenever you have a mixture of DNA, sometimes the random match probability can be misleading, can't it?
It depends on how you're using it. In this case, Linda determined the profile of the major DNA contributor, which is basically doing a single source statistical analysis.
Yeah, and you've already told us that you had a partial profile from F5.
Yes.
I'd like you to focus your attention again on F5, on this stain. You didn't do any testing of the stain yourself, did you?
No, that was all done by Linda Sauer.
And so the profile, the male profile from that stain, as you said, was determined by Linda Sauer when she did this testing back in 2005.
Yes.
And we know from her testimony, and I think from yours as well, that it was a mixture. Do we know that the other contributor was a female?
I'd have to refer to Linda Sauer's report and what she said. She Linda said, for stain number 5, a partial male profile with complete DNA results at 11 STR loci and partial results at an additional 2 loci was obtained. She also went on to say, results from a second minor contributor were noted at 2 loci, D13S317 and VWA. The donor of the profiles from the dress stains number 6, 7, and 8 could be the source of the minor contribution. And the dress stains from 6, 7, and 8, in a paragraph above that, she said, were female profiles. So basically, she was saying that the female profiles from stains 6, 7, and 8, whoever that female was, could be the minor donor in stain F5 of the dress.
Based on the identity of those 2 loci.
Yes.
All right. And Ms. Sauer, when she was with us yesterday, last week, said that she couldn't tell whether the contribution of that male profile came from blood or sweat or mucus or saliva. You would agree with that, wouldn't you?
That's right. The testing we do at the DCI lab, we can't say where the DNA is coming from. We can only say that the DNA is there, that the stain screen positive for blood, and we have DNA there. We can't say the DNA is coming from blood. We don't have a test that tells us that.
And the comparisons that you've testified about this afternoon were all comparisons to that F5.
With the exception of the hair root comparison I did that matched the known profile of Michael Weirick.
Because that was the only male profile you were submitted to compare, other than, of course, the known profiles of Ken Burns, Don Burns, and Jerry Burns.
There were approximately 40 people that I eliminated during the course of my work on this case. It wasn't just Jerry Burns and 2 of his brothers. There were a number of other persons of interest that I eliminated. It was about 40 people that I eliminated. And before me, when other criminalists were working on the case, Linda Sauer, Paul Bush, they eliminated about another 80 people from being the DNA donor to the F5 dress stain.
Well, it was a poorly worded question, and I apologize for that. What I meant to ask you was, of all the people about you whom you've testified, you were only comparing to F5, to whether or not those people were contributors or could be eliminated or not eliminated to F5.
For the hair, I did make comparisons from persons of interest going back to 2002 and compared those to the hair root. So I did make those comparisons versus the hair root until I found a match to Michael Weirick. At that point, after I found a match to Michael Weirick, I didn't look at the hair root anymore. I was only comparing the F5 dress stain to known DNA profiles from persons of interest.
So once again, I'll ask you, Mr. Schmidt, you were asked, for purposes of your appearance today, to testify about who might have contributed to F5.
Yes.
All right. And if there were other male profiles at the crime scene, on the dress, in the car, you weren't given any other profiles to compare.
The hair root was the only other male profile.
The hair was the only one.
Yeah.
You weren't asked to examine the DNA from the steering wheel, Exhibit H, were you?
No.
You did examine Exhibit I, right?
I was asked to examine Exhibit I, but it was determined that I could not report any comparisons regarding Exhibit I.
And the reason why?
There were a couple errors on one of the statistics sheets that Linda Sauer prepared back in when she looked at it originally in 2002. So the one sheet that had errors we just couldn't use. That was a mixture statistic, and we stopped reporting that kind of statistic a while back anyway. There was another statistic sheet where she determined what the minor DNA donor on the gear shift would be. So that there was that statistic, but it was such a small number that today we're not even reporting on numbers that small. And I could give you that number if you want me to, but I don't know if I should. I don't.
The small number?
Yes.
Let's have it.
It was approximately 1 out of 400.
But you continued thereafter to say that it was no longer reportable?
That's correct.
Okay. No longer reportable because of the error?
And my technical leader decided that number was too small. We just don't report numbers that small. Right now, we require, in a mixture sample, we require 10 loci to call a major donor and 7 loci to require to report a minor donor. This would, I don't know in that sample that you had that 7 loci to report a minor donor. So it's just something, it's the kind of sample we wouldn't touch nowadays. That's about as best as I can explain it.
Okay. So you've acknowledged for us that you didn't test the blood lift from the steering wheel, Exhibit H. Did you examine the spermatozoa, Exhibit F4, that was found in the panties?
No.
Or a package from the back seat of the car?
No. There were only 2 male DNA profiles that I was aware of that were comparable from the crime scene, and that was the hair root and the F5 dress stain. The previous DNA analyses done by Linda Sauer, those were the only 2 that we could make comparisons with as far as male DNA profiles go.
So I guess it's elementary that you can only examine what you're submitted.
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to ask you some additional questions about your experience in crime scene examination and preservation. In your opinion, Mr. Schmidt, can dry specimens of DNA be transferred from one place to another?
It depends on the condition of the sample. I've had bloody evidence on homicides. Sometimes when they sit in a sack for a while, they get powderized, basically fine powder of blood gets everywhere. And if you're not careful in how you seal up the sack, some of that powder could potentially escape from the sack, and that's not a good thing.
So would the answer be yes?
Yes, you can have a dry blood stain that becomes particleized, and it would be possible in that case, if you weren't careful in what you're doing, to have that transfer to something else.
What about skin cells?
The testing we do is very sensitive. We can get touch DNA. For example, if I were to put my hands on this counter and then somebody from the crime scene team came and swabbed where I touched on the counter, it would be possible to get my DNA profile from the counter just by me touching it. It doesn't happen every time. There has to be enough DNA deposited there. And if there's a lot of different people's DNA there also, you may not get results. But it is possible.
So stated differently, it would be inaccurate or erroneous to say that dry DNA cannot be transferred from one location to another.
Yeah, you can have blood flake off an item, and if you're not careful, that could get into another item of evidence. It just depends on the procedures and precautions you have in place when you're examining evidence.
Okay. Lastly, the statistics about which you testified this afternoon, especially the comparison of the known DNA of Jerry Burns and the DNA extracted from the straw of Jerry Burns, was a very impressive number, a quintillion, I think you referred to it.
Yes.
But that was comparing Jerry to Jerry.
Well, it was comparing the straw to the known of Jerry. And so since that straw the profile was developed with our current kit that has 21 loci, then I could use the statistics for those 21 loci. When Linda Sauer developed her results, she only had the 11 or 12 loci, and back then we cut the statistic off at 100 billion. And that's what was on her stat sheet, and also in her report, 100 billion. And so since she used the 100 billion, I can't take that number and make it higher. I have to do what she did. I had to make my comparisons with that. She created the statistic sheet based on the question profile, so I have to use that and the wording in her report.
Well, Mr. Schmidt, I appreciate that answer, but it wasn't the answer to the question I asked you. The question I asked you was, it was comparing Mr. Burns to Mr. Burns, a straw that was known to come from him against a known buccal swab.
It's just the way that you worded it, comparing Mr. Burns to Mr. Burns. I'd have to say that I compared the profile developed from the straw to the known profile of Jerry Burns, and they were consistent. We don't make identifications in DNA. We say whether it's a match or an elimination or it's consistent. Fingerprints, they will make an identification. They will say that this fingerprint came from this individual, and it couldn't have come from anybody else. We just do not do that in forensic DNA. You have identical twins, so there's always that possibility that, it's even when you have an exact match.
Well, Mr. Schmidt, coming into this courtroom, you knew exactly where those specimens came from, didn't you?
I knew that stain F5 came from the dress, and
you knew that the straw came from Jerry Burns, and you knew that the known buccal swab came from Jerry Burns.
I have to trust that the information on our evidence receipt forms are correct, that the investigators are honest when they're filling out those evidence receipt forms. If the detective tells me that the straw came from Jerry Burns or Ken Burns, I just assume that's correct. I'm not the one that collected the straw, so I wasn't there. I can't tell you that it came from him. I'm taking the investigator's word for it.
Finally, concerning the other numbers about which you testified, you said that these statistics are based on comparisons to populations of unrelated individuals. And in this situation, we don't have a population of unrelated individuals, do we?
Well, the statistic uses the population of unrelated individuals, but in the case, we do have knowns from 3 brothers, and they would be related.
Yeah, and we have generations and family trees of related individuals in this case. Don't we?
Yes, I am aware of that, yes. I didn't do that family tree testing, I just looked at the known buckles and compared them to the crime scene profile.
Thank you. I have no other questions.
You're welcome.
Redirect, Mr. Maybanks.
Yes, briefly, Your Honor. Mike, so with regard to F5, the crime scene profile, and what you've been able to review and determine from Linda's profile, to what extent really is the F5 profile mixture?
There's a major DNA, a clear major DNA donor in that profile. Otherwise, Linda wouldn't have made the allele calls that she did when she did the analysis. Now, there's an indication of a minor donor at only 2 of those loci. I looked at the actual profile, and you can see there's a definite major donor and then a really weak minor donor. So as far as Linda's calls, allele calls, that they looked good. I don't have any issues with the major profile determination that she made in that sample.
Along the same lines, you were asked about Linda's determination about whether the source here came from blood or sweat or mucus, in the determination that you can't say that necessarily say DNA is coming from the blood, but you can say that blood is there, right? Was that the finding of the laboratory?
Screening indicated the presence of blood on that same area where Linda took her DNA sample.
And from your testimony today, then, are you saying that there's limited circumstances, if any, where you can actually rule out another source without testing, using a presumptive test for that source?
That's right. Linda screened for blood. We do have screening tests for saliva and also seminal fluid, but Linda used the screening test for blood. She saw what looked like a blood stain on the dress and took her sample to run DNA.
And the finding we have here is that we know there's blood there. We know there's DNA there. And your findings show the major contributor was consistent with Jerry Burns.
Yes. There were 8 other stains on the dress that Mike Peterson looked at the first one, and Linda Sauer took the archived extract from that stain and ran the 15 STR markers on that. And so that was used basically as a known or deduced known profile of Michelle Martinko. Linda could see that was a female profile from that very first dress stain that she looked at, that Mike Peterson had collected back in 1997. Linda took, besides that first one that Mike Peterson and Linda Sauer analyzed, there were 8 more stains. Now, one of those was an F5 stain, but the other 7 were other blood stains that Linda performed DNA testing on. And the DNA profiles from those gave a female profile that was consistent or matched the first original female stain. So there's not just the one profile from the dress. There's the one profile that has a major male in the dress, and there are other profiles from the dress, but those are all coming from a female believed to be Michelle Martinko.
Excuse me. And from that analysis, then, in reviewing Linda's reports, is there confidence that the major contributor of F5 indeed is not Michelle Martinko?
The major is not Michelle Martinko in stain F5. It's a male.
Now, you talked a little bit today about your crime scene experience. In your training, as far as collecting items of evidence and then subsequently examining those items of evidence to determine the source, are you trained to consider the surrounding circumstances of an offense and the evidence that shows what occurred at the offense to also come to conclusions on what the source of DNA is? If that makes sense.
No.
Okay. Late in the day. Well, in a crime such as this, where there's a lot of blood, where, let's say, investigators tell you that there's proof that, that they believe that the crime scene shows that a knife was used for a stabbing, is it a fair conclusion that in your analysis of the crime scene that a DNA source that would be evident in those circumstances would be blood?
The blood that was spilled from the victim's wounds, I would expect to be there.
Or potentially from the suspect?
If the suspect cut himself on the knife.
To your knowledge, was there a profile developed from Exhibit H, the blood from the steering wheel?
In 1997, Mike Peterson attempted DNA analysis on the tape lift of the steering wheel from Exhibit H. He determined that the DNA isolated was insufficient for analysis. And then in 2002, Linda Sauer attempted DNA testing on the DNA extract that Mike Peterson saved from 1997, but her testing was unsuccessful on Exhibit H.
And same with the few spermatozoa microscopically identified. Is your understanding there was never a profile developed from that as well?
That's right.
So without a profile, then it's not possible to make a comparison to any other individuals, known profiles, is it?
Not with the testing I'm doing. I would need a profile from a crime scene to compare to known individuals.
With regard to Exhibit I and some of the questions you were asked about that, you testified you determined that you could not report further comparisons because of errors in statistics. And my question to you is, were those errors determined to be done simply in the statistical compilation but not in the actual development of the profile itself?
Yes, it was transcription error on the mixture statistics worksheet. Linda Sauer's report still stands. The conclusions she made at the time are still valid conclusions. It's just that because of the errors in the statistics sheet, she cannot back up that conclusion. And in our state, we need to have that statistic. We can't just say it matches or was consistent. We have to have that statistics. Otherwise, whatever I say can't be heard.
But you didn't see any concerns in the way that Linda Sauer developed the crime scene profiles, F5, Exhibit I, or any of her other findings, did you?
I didn't watch her do these analyses at the time. I didn't see anything in the case file to show or indicate, that she did anything wrong. I wasn't there when I wasn't observing her when she did the actual testing.
So you have no evidence that there was anything done improperly in developing the profile?
I know Linda. She trained me, and she doesn't seem like the type of person that would, on purpose, try to frame somebody for a crime or work sloppy intentionally. She was very focused and dedicated to her job, and I learned a lot from her.
Okay.
Your Honor, I'm going to move to strike that as improper testimony about the credibility of a witness, probably the subject of opinion testimony. And move to strike and ask that my objection precede the witness's spontaneous answer on that.
Any response to the objection, Mr. Maybanks?
I would just say that it would be in response to cross-examination and regarding errors in Linda Sawyer's compilation of statistics.
To the extent that this witness, Mr. Schmidt, has testified regarding what could be construed as the credibility of Linda Sauer, who was previously before you, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to strike the portion of his answer that comments on her credibility as a witness and ask that you disregard that testimony. You may regard and rely upon testimony that Ms. Sauer gave personally, but it's not appropriate for one witness to comment on the credibility of another witness's testimony.
With that, Your Honor, we have no further questions.
Additional cross-examination, Mr. Spees.
Yes, so, Mr. Schmidt, to be clear, concerning the major contributor to F5, you can't say that it came from blood, you can't say that it came from saliva, you can't say that it came from some other biological material, can you?
That's right. We don't have a test that tells us where the DNA came from. I can only say the DNA profile was developed in the same spot on the dress that also screened positive for blood.
Not only can you not say what biologic substance it came from, you can't say when it got there, can you?
I can't. I didn't do the analysis. I would say it was there at some point before Linda Sauer looked at it, but I can't say exactly when. There's no way for me to know.
Not only can you not say when it got there, you can't say how it got there.
I can't, there's no way for me to know that.
Thank you. Nothing else.
Additional direct examination, Mr. Maybanks.
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. You may step down.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we will adjourn for the evening. We will plan to see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Again, bear in mind the importance of the oath that you took when you were seated as the jury in this case. Don't discuss the case amongst yourselves with any other individual. Don't let anyone pester you or talk to you about what they've heard or seen about this case. You are the triers of the facts, the judges of the facts in this case, and what that means is it is your obligation to decide the case based on information you have heard in this courtroom exclusively. So have a good evening, try to relax, and we'll see you back tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Thank you.